How you doing? Hello everybody and welcome back to the Educated Colin Snap channel. Today we're doing our Loki first impressions. Actually, I should have done this 2 days ago, but I was lazy on that day. But now we have it today, yes sir! And we're going to be talking about how good Loki is, or how bad Loki is, or how mid Loki is. That's Loki in particular. Let's get started. Alright, so first off, Loki is a 3 energy 5 power card. On reveal, replace your cards from your opponent's starting deck, give a -1 cost. This card has ended up being very good, in essence, due to the huge amount of synergies you can do with this card. And it just has easy combos with Quinjet and Collector. Those two in particular stand out to being a very, very easy combo. If you have one of those two, when you play them together, you just generate huge value or huge power, and it's made this card very, very playable. So ends up being better than I expected, right? I was a little bit concerned about the inconsistency of the random cards you're getting from your opponent. The one caveat is that everyone's playing decks that Loki works well with, right? Low curve decks with a lot of like base power that don't rely on much synergy by themselves. So a lot of cards you're getting from your opponents tend to be good right now. I do think if the meta adjusts and people start deviating away from Loki decks, it could definitely feel a lot worse to play. But right now, pretty strong, and it's just has a lot of good synergies that everyone is really just holding on to. Now, in terms of should you buy this card, I would say for now, yes, this is a pretty good card to get. Season Pass cards usually have good value. If you want to support the game in any way, Season Pass cards are usually your best bet. Since this is one, it's pretty easy to recommend. The card is strong. The card is fun to play, which I think is decently important. And I would just recommend the card. I will caveat that Mobius is coming out in a couple of weeks, and that will shut down the playstyle since you won't be able to get the discounts. I do think copying your opponent's decks without any discounts does not feel good. So especially when you're running Quinjet and stuff, you just shut down both of those cards. So I do think that for now it feels really good. It feels really strong, but there is a counter coming into the game the same month. So just keep that in mind. You're not going to be able to play this deck consistently for the whole season. So, but for now and in general, I do think this is a good enough card that it makes sense to play with it and add it to your collection. So definitely fine with that. Now, in terms of some of the synergies, most of the synergies are just card generation and just ways to manipulate card generation. Those are really where all the synergies lie. So you have Quinjet, Collector, Devil Dinosaur. Those are like the big payoffs in terms of having card generation. But then you just have a lot of card generation cards that you can freely add to your deck without too much of a hassle. And the change of Snow Guard has really helped this deck a lot. It's probably intentional as well that Snow Guard just got changed and it just slots in perfectly into a Loki deck. It honestly makes the deck much better as well, right? You have a 1-drop that gives you a lot of value and can be used early game, mid game, doesn't really matter. It still generates a ton of value. So just kind of interesting that they're balancing like that. But yeah, generally, a lot of the synergies are just card generation in some way, and Loki just loves that because you just get a big payoff, right? You get -1 cost every time you get a different card, so a lot of good value there. Now, one final thing I want to talk about in terms of Loki decks that I was thinking about, and I decided to capitalize on my thought here, so bear with me. But take a look at this. Aren't Loki decks just new age bounce? Aren't they? So when you look at the Loki decks and how they play, a lot of times I would say that Loki is played on turn 5. Sometimes they're played earlier, turn 4, turn 5. But that's very similar to how Bounce does it, right? They bounce, they beast. Loki's just beast. You beast on turn 4, turn 5, and then you pop off the next turn. They have some of the similar weaknesses where if you wave a Loki on turn 5, right, they kind of suffer a little bit. Same thing with Beast. I mean, same thing with Bounce, right? Collector is our bishop, right? Collector is our bishop. Then we have Agent Coulson's like our Mysterio. Legion's like our Iron Man. Quinjet's our Bast. Essentially, it's the same deck. It's the same playstyle. It's just, you swap a couple of things. But when I was playing this Loki deck, I just kind of had this feeling like I'm playing Bounce, essentially. But it's just reskinned and has maybe a little bit more upsides in that you're not fully reliant on the game plan of Loki. You can definitely do other things, and Collector, Angela is still the same. But I just want to throw it out there. This is not something I've really seen anyone make a distinction, so I figured I'd do it. They're very similar in how they play, and I think that's something interesting to think about when you're playing the deck yourself and how you pilot it, because this thought really changed like how I was playing it. Not really, I mean I was playing it the same, but at least like I was like, oh, this is how would a bounce deck function in this exact situation. I was like, it's the same. But anyways, that was my thought. I thought it was interesting and I wanted to throw it out there. But yeah, now we can kind of talk about some of the decks that people are playing. I would say the list on the right is a pretty good representation. The list on the left is a pretty good representation of what Loki decks want to do. You just have good early game with Collector, Angela, Kitty Pryde. Then you have a lot of card generation, and then hopefully you have Quinjet out. And if you Quinjet Loki, everything's -2, which is just insane. By the way, -2, and it can go down to 0 if you're copying a 0 cost card, a 1 cost card. So you can just flood super hard on that final turn. So just a very, very, very strong combination. But let's officially look at some of the actual deck lists here. So the first list we have is the same list, right? It's just, but the one caveat with this one, I believe it's the same list. Let me check. No, it's not the same list, chat. This is the same list. Thank you. Here we go. The one caveat here is that this is using a lot of expensive cards, right? So this one has Snowguard, Mirage, and Jeff, which most people, I think, will not have all 3 of them. So it's a little bit harder to look at this and be like, oh yeah, I could just copy this. I do think what's more likely is the second list, which is very, very similar, but doesn't run any of the 3, right? No Jeff, no Snowguard, no Mirage, and it still works perfectly fine. You don't really need those cards. There's a lot of replacement in card generation. Like they've added quite a bit, right? So you're not really feeling it too hard. I think Cable's fine. I think Nebula's fine. Nebula, I'd say, is maybe not as good. You might want to run Sunspot instead, just because a lot of people are playing Kitty, and Nebula and Kitty don't mix, right? Nebula just stays there, and Kitty just jumps on her every turn. It's like not fun. But generally, this is just a replacement for if you're missing Jeff, all 3, any of the 3, you can just add some of these suggestions, and it works perfectly fine. So I just wanted to throw it out there because I know that's what I always get anytime there's a list with any Series 4, Series 5 cards. People are always wondering, oh, I don't have this. What can I replace it with, right? So, and this is just a list that doesn't use any of them. So most people can play with it as long as you get Loki yourself. And then next up is the Devil Dinosaur. So Devil Dinosaur, people have been not running it. Seems like you don't need it. And a lot of times the way Loki works, you just empty your hand on the final turn. So the Devil Dinosaur doesn't really feel necessary, and also can sometimes feel weak. This just has Devil Dinosaur as a secondary game plan. You're not necessarily always going Loki here. So you can go Loki, and it does work well if you're going Quinjet, Zabu, Nick Fury, Loki. that will definitely do it for you. But let's say you don't have the Quinjet, or you don't have the curve. Instead of doing that, you could just go Devil Dinosaur into something else. Devil Dinosaur into Iron Lad Nick Fury, super good. Mystique Nick Fury, super good. So you just have a secondary win condition instead of just fully indexing on that Loki game plan. I think that's always nice to have if you are feeling, a little bit too weak or too vulnerable by if you don't draw Loki, you lose. Well, this gives you another out where even if you don't have Loki, you still have other ways to win. So that's always nice. Next up is the Silky Smooth, is just an adaptation using that base but still playing Loki. So you still get the Quinjet Loki combo. You still get a lot of card draw with the Agent Coulson and Nick Fury, but now you get to play Crave and you get to play Silk. Those, and you get to play Spider-Man. Those are the real three big advantages of using this base. But it's nice, like the nice thing about Loki is that you can just put it into other decks and it still functions decently well because the base stats of the cards are pretty good, right? Loki's stats are pretty good. Angela, Kitty stats are really, really strong. Quinjet is okay. It's a one drop, so you're not losing too much. And then the card generation is usually pretty good as well. Agent Coulson is pretty good, and Nick Fury, I put them together, are also pretty good cards, just generally. So it ends up being that the base of Loki isn't bad in itself. So because it's kind of like Darkhawk, where the base of Darkhawk is pretty good by itself, that you can slot that base into lots of different decks. Same thing here. You can slot the Loki base into lots of different decks, and it still functions decently well. Like you would say like maybe the ceiling is lower because you're not fully indexing into a Loki archetype, but because the floor is also really high, you can just have lots of different game plans, lots of different styles, and you're not necessarily locked into, oh, you're playing a Loki deck, you need the same 12 cards. You can put maybe 4 or 5 of those Loki base in there and then mix up the rest of them. So that's really nice. And then last one I talked about, right? We talked about this is just like bounce. Well, put it in a bounce deck, right? Put it in a bounce deck. So here we do have a bounce list with Loki in there as well. It's just a nice little thing you can do. I'll definitely say this is definitely more of a bounce deck than a Loki deck. You just have a 3/5 in that you can probably play in the last turns or before the last turns to do stuff. It also gives you another like out in terms of, let's say your hand isn't necessarily good into the matchup. Well, maybe you'd rather just play a mirror, or a mirror with less cost, right? And that might be better for you, right? So it just gives you a secondary thing to do in case you feel like the bounce game plan isn't necessarily going to lead you to a win. So definitely think it's kind of nice. A little bit cheesy. Not necessarily saying this one is very Loki centric. This is just a bounce deck with Loki in it that works generally well. So I just wanted to toss that in there. But overall, in terms of my thoughts on Loki and how good I do think it is, I do think Loki is a pretty strong card that has a lot of benefits for players. And it should be a card that's pretty fun to play and will stay fun, right? You steal your opponent's cards and they're better than your opponent's, right? Like it feels pretty scummy to just steal their cards and play it against them, but it does work pretty well, right? So you just have to be careful of Mobius when it comes out, and just make sure you adapt to that release, because it's definitely going to shut down the Quinjet interaction. Is going to shut down the card decrease interaction, right? So you're gonna have to adjust, but that's not in a few weeks. So you do have a lot of time to play with Loki, have some fun with it, and really work well with it. And right now, it's doing really well in the meta. I do think that's just because everyone's playing Loki. It's the same thing happened to High Evolutionary, right? Like everyone's playing High Evolutionary. Its stats was insane, right? But once people started deviating away from it, High Evolutionary stats dropped down a little bit, and I think that's it. Also got nerfed a little bit, to be fair. But I do think Loki is having that same kind of feeling where everyone's playing with it, so its stats are really good. But once people start deviating away from it, having decks that actually counter it, I think you'll start seeing it be like just a nice deck to play, but not like oppressive as it currently is. Also, Snow Guards changes like crazy, I will say. Now I'm spitballing. Anyways, that's that's the Loki first impressions. Essentially, I don't end up doing final reviews just because by that time people just already have the card. They're kind of moved past it. They want to move on to the next thing. So this is usually just my only review these days. But yeah, take care of yourselves. Hope you guys enjoy it. The deck, it's a fun meta right now. Really wondering what the next few weeks look like in terms of Marvel Snap. I'll see you guys later. Take care of yourselves and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educated calling Snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to Marvel Snap. Your skills will be